Well, in this video today, John Bever and I are going to discuss the provisions of the CARE Act and some other acts that can benefit you as a small business owner if you're struggling a bit during this COVID-19 crisis. So thanks for joining us, John. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, it's a real pleasure to do this, and we love doing this for our clients.
Excellent. So why don't we start off talking about specifically the CARES Act that was passed here at the end of March and the provisions that are available in it for small business owners. How's that sound?
Sounds great. So the CARES Act was passed in order to move money into the hands of Americans as quickly as possible, both individuals and businesses. Because of the sharp downturn in the economy from the COVID-19 outbreak, the government is very concerned that we're going to lose a quarter here of just no productivity, no revenue. So what they're doing is they're putting money into the hands of Americans so we can continue to spend and people can pay their bills so we can keep the system moving forward until people can go back to work.
Great. They're in this bill, John, too, there's a provision for employers to be able to pay their employees if they need to take time off because they're affected by this virus. Can you tell us how that works?
Yes, there was an extension of the Family Medical Leave Act, and so if you have an employee that cannot come to work or cannot put in the time because either they have contracted the COVID virus or they're suspected of having contracted it and need to seek medical attention. Also, if they need to stay home to care for a family member, or if they are locked in and can't get to their job because of some lock-in that's been done by the state or, for example, the schools being closed, then that employee is eligible for up to 80 hours, 2 weeks of pay at 40 hours a week. It is paid by the employer, and the employer is then reimbursed by the federal government through the payroll tax system. If the time off is directly related to medical reasons, then that time will be reimbursed 100%. If it is for the care of a child, it will be reimbursed at 2/3 of the regular pay.
All right, that's great. So let's turn now to kind of what really gets the press in this is the Payroll Protection Plan, the PPP, which
Yes.
is also in the CARES Act, but requires an actual separate application process. So tell us about what is this PPP that we're hearing about, John?
So the PPP, there's a lot of confusion around it because it's been rolled out so quickly. The first thing that they did to create confusion was to change the name from the Payroll Protection Program to the Paycheck Protection Program. So they wanted to just make it very clear that this is really about getting money into the hands of the workers is really what this is about. So the provision allows the employer to apply for a loan through the Small Business Administration. Then they use that loan to maintain payroll. And the key provisions are that the employer must maintain payroll, must maintain the number of employees in order to qualify for this loan to be forgiven. So it is based on last year's payroll, and it is just being used as a stopgap. Think of it as a loan, a forgivable loan to help employers maintain their workforce.
Excellent. So like you said, this is a loan, but it technically can be all or a portion of it can be completely forgiven if you adhere to the provisions of the bill, correct?
That is correct. So those provisions are, first of all, the amount that you can borrow is based on your average monthly payroll from 2019. Once you have that average monthly amount, you multiply that by 2.5, 2.5 times is what you would qualify for. When you receive that money, you have 2 months to spend it on payroll. 75% of the proceeds must be used on your payroll. The other 25% could also be used for rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. So they are giving a little bit of wiggle room here for employers that might have had a higher payroll in 2019 and a little bit lower payroll in 2020, maybe due to COVID-19, but also just maybe due to cyclical issues with the business.
So although it's based on 2.5 months of payroll, you've only got 2 months, theoretically, 8 weeks in order to spend that money on payroll. So You either have to pay more out in payroll than you typically would have, or you've got to be using it for some of those other expenses you mentioned.
That is correct.
Excellent. And so what happens if someone doesn't necessarily need these funds? Should they still apply?
It's a really good question. So it's fairly loose on the wording. Wording is, are you negatively impacted by COVID-19? And it's hard to think of a business that might not be negatively impacted. Most will be impacted. A few won't be, but the majority will, especially in the small business arena. And this is especially for small businesses, those with under 500 employees. So you might not be affected immediately, but you may be affected a month or two, or even 2 or 3 quarters down the road due to the delay of how money works through the system. People have contracts that are still being completed, payments being made, but they may find that the final payment for that contract is not going to show up because that person that hired them or that business that hired them suddenly doesn't have enough funds to go ahead and pay that final amount of the contract due to the downturn in the economy. So it's worded loosely, specifically because they do want small businesses to take this loan. They're greatly encouraging the small businesses to take this loan in order to keep the money running through the system.
And John, I know a lot of our clients are actually independent contractors or sole proprietors, so they have no one on payroll. Are they still eligible to apply for the PPP loan?
Yes, because payroll does include the owner. There is a limit, however. That limit is $100,000 of payroll per person. So if you have some highly compensated people in your business, you as a business owner might be highly compensated, and your income was over $100,000 last year, only the first $100,000 of your pay for 2019 is included in the calculations.
So, for example, a sole proprietor who, even if they make $300,000 a year, for the purposes of this loan, we would assume $100,000 a year, and at 2.5 months, that'd be a little over 20 grand.
That is correct, and they qualify for it as a sole proprietor. Independent contractors out there that receive a 1099 for what they do, and they really only work for one entity, they also qualify.
And my understanding, John, is payroll does not include independent contractors in terms of a sole proprietor hiring an independent contractor. Is that your understanding as well?
That is correct. There are very few exceptions to that, but generally you should operate on the assumption that if you have both employees, W-2 employees, and 1099 workers on your payroll, this only covers the W-2 employees. It does not cover the 1099 workers. Those 1099 workers need to apply for their own PPP loan.
Absolutely. Excellent. And how about, John, this actually applies in some cases to non-for-profit, correct?
It does. All nonprofits are included in this. Some nonprofits, again, are a little hesitant to take this, wondering what will happen to their status, perhaps feeling like they're crawling into bed with the federal government. But again, the purpose of this is actually to keep money rolling through the system. So if your nonprofit accepts donations and your donations are dropping, you certainly should apply for this PPP loan. Remember, it is not based on donations, it's not based on revenue, it's based on your payroll.
Excellent. So non-for-profit, they don't have to worry about their status being jeopardized, even if they're a faith-based group, which is good.
That is correct. That is correct.
And so John, if we do take out the loan, let's say, and all of our expenses don't quite qualify, so there's still some things that won't be forgiven, what are the terms of the loan on the remaining dollars?
So the way this loan works is that it is a 2-year loan, and that starts from the time of disbursement. If you don't spend the entire PPP amount on the qualifying expenses, whatever is left is going to turn into a loan that is not forgivable but has to be paid back. So let's say, for example, you receive a PPP loan for $100,000. You have $80,000 of qualifying expenses, so you're left with $20,000 at the end that turns into a loan. It is a 2-year loan from the time of disbursement. 6 months into the loan, payments will begin, so you'll have 18 months to pay back that loan. The interest rate is 1%. So it's a very nominal amount, very doable, and don't hesitate to take the full amount of the PPP because you're not sure you'll use it. Those terms are very easy to pay back, and the government wants to make sure that this money gets into the hands of businesses so they can continue to keep their workers on payroll, because this is really a temporary situation. So they are looking at this as really a paid furlough for businesses that just don't have the resources to do that.
It's typical when you have a loan forgiven that it is fully taxable. How does it work in this case? Do the business owners who have their loan forgiven will they have to pay tax on that amount?
Fortunately, no. You're right. Most loans where there is some forgiven amount, that amount gets picked up on a tax return, but not the PPP loan. So don't worry about having to pick up extra income on your tax return. If you end up paying interest, that becomes an interest expense to the company. There's also a question, though, about any business that might have to answer about having some loan reduced or forgiven. We're not quite sure how that's going to be handled in 2020 for those industries and businesses that have to answer those questions. We're still waiting for regulations on that.
So I think we've got a good handle on how this works in theory. So let's talk about how this works in real life, John, because this is a huge amount of money being put out as quickly as possible, but there's still only so many banks that one can go to apply for this. So how does this work? Who should you go to if you're interested in applying for this loan?
So if you're going to apply for this loan, you need to go to your bank where you actually have your business relationship. If you're a sole proprietor or a 1099, it would be your personal bank. And most of the banks will be offering the application process. It is a small business administration loan, but you do apply through your local bank. And don't show up at the branch. Actually, this is all being done online. So some banks are a little slower at getting this up and running. The first day that these were supposed to be available, which was a Friday, really no bank had their ducks in a row because this is happening so quickly. In fact, it's been referred to as trying to build a plane in the air. You might have seen that commercial many years ago. And it's obviously a real challenge to build a plane while it's flying, and that's really what's trying to be done here. It's a monumental task, both for the government as well as for the banks. By that Monday, some banks were up and running, but even at this point in time, 3 days into the program, not all the banks are up and running. So again, be patient. That's the most important thing about this whole process with this CARES Act. A lot of money is trying to be moved very, very quickly. It is a monumental task, so just be patient. There may be a stopping point for dispersing the funds because there's only $350 billion available, and this is a first-come, first-served. So what happens if you step in line and the person in front of you gets the last dollar, there's nothing left for you? Well, don't worry, because Congress has assured the American people that they will be extending this amount if they need to. In fact, right now as we're taping this, there's a bill for $250 billion of additional money for the PPP program to be made available, and that will surely pass within the next couple of days.
Wonderful. And we could certainly use that money, I'm sure, for most folks in this predicament. So that is the PPP program. Separate from that, though, John, there is one other option that folks have that was not part of the CARES Act. It's just been on the books for a long time through the Small Business Administration, and that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. Tell us about that.
So this is a separate loan, but it is going to coordinate with PPP. So under the EIDL, you could qualify for a $10,000 loan, and it is a loan that you would use for expenses, really anything that you need to use it for your business during this disaster. If you also take a PPP loan, those two will be combined. You will have to pay the $10,000 on the EIDL back if it's deemed not to be a grant for you, and it will also reduce the amount for your PPP. So for example, let's say you qualify for $100,000 under the PPP, and you also qualify for $10,000 under EIDL. $10,000 of the $100,000 would be EIDL. The other $90,000 would be PPP.
Excellent, excellent. So that gives a few points of help for small business owners and sole proprietors. That's wonderful. And if people have questions, if any of you watching have any questions in your particular situation, certainly you can reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer any questions that we may have. Also, keep in mind that this bill, although it has been passed, it is law. Regulators still need to weigh in on what those regulations would be, and everything is still a little up in the air. But we'll be certainly watching it closely. If you have any questions, certainly reach out to us. Thanks so much, John, for all your help today and helping us understand this this new CARES Act all the better.
You're welcome, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in.